I joined the Air Force in 4th of September 1939, and as you know, war broke out on, well, it was actually 4th of September when I signed on. So the Air Force Airboard was in a flap. They wanted pilots quickly, and they realised that there were quite a number of civilian pilots in Australia who had some experience, so their idea was to bring those in and give them what they call a service flying training course. Now, what do we do with these 53 new cadets? So they decided that the civil flying schools, so there was a couple at Essendon and a couple at Mascot, one up at Newcastle, would farm us out for our ab initio. So I went to the Kingsford Smith Flying School, as it was then, at Mascot, did my initio on Gypsy Moth, on the old Gypsy Moth, lovely aircraft to fly. And then they brought us together in two Demon squadrons, one at Laverton, 21, and the other one at Richmond, I think it must have been 22. And I graduated from there with wings, as they're so called, and then I was posted to 22 Squadron at Laverton on the kind old Anson. Now, while I was there, this was in 1940, the Hudsons began to arrive. Two squadrons, and one squadron was also at Laverton. They were being re-equipped with a new Hudson, without turrets, I might add. So I flew a few times with Bob Hitchcock and a few other people. And then in, I think it must have been about August of 1940, perhaps a little before, 8 Squadron was formed out here at Fairburn, began to form at Fairburn. So I was posted to Fairburn with a number of others, and we endured the cold winter intense out here at Fairburn. And then in July 1940, number 1 Squadron was sent to Singapore, followed a few weeks later in August by number 8 Squadron. So I arrived in Sembawang on Singapore. We staged through, first of all, Alice Springs, then on to Darwin for a couple of days while the fitters checked the engines and a few things, through Surabaya and on to Singapore. That's how I arrived in Singapore. And it was a lovely place, looked like a good war. Because the war was in Europe then. And we had a lovely time there. We also had a tour of the squadrons interchange between Kota Bharu and Zimbabwe. And this is the young fellow I'm talking about. This will show on your book of songs, but this is the young fellow who was a flight lieutenant then when the war started. The war started, as you know. Well, in the meantime, we had wonderful trips because the high brass in Singapore, the air marshals and the generals got in on the act. The Hudson was, as you know, was a converted civil airliner. So the squadron fitted it with a bench and a couple of seats, cane chairs tied to the floor, and we had trips to Kota Bharu, to Thailand, and generally around the place across to Java, do a bit of liaison with the Dutch, and that was my aircraft, the one I flew on the first day of the war. We were our main purpose in being in Singapore. As you know, the Brits were very short of their aircraft and crews, and they got the exchange, got Australia to agree they'd send 2 Hudson squadrons, 1 and 8, and a Wirraway squadron, 21, to look after things in the Far East. Singapore was supposed to be an impregnable fortress, so it should have been an easy job. Then the Buffaloes began to arrive, and there were 4 Buffalo squadrons set up on they weren't all set up on Singapore Island. The British had some Blenheim bombers there, and of course the old wildebeest, the Andaluvian wildebeest, they had 2 squadrons of those. And we were, in the Hudsons, the main task was seaward reconnaissance out over the South China Sea, and deployment to Kluang, in preparation for a wartime deployment, which we thought would never happen, of course, and also deployment to Kuantan, as well as Kota Bharu. Well, things went along very nicely. Singapore was a very social scene in those days. There were some lovely British girls there, I must say. But we went off. We knew that things were turning sour because information came through that the Japanese were interested in Singapore, and while we were at Kota Bharu, which is way up the north, just on the Thai border on the east coast, practically every Sunday morning, about once a month, a high altitude reconnaissance aircraft would come over. First of all, we thought it was a new British aircraft that they'd landed from somewhere because it had a high-pitched whine. We could hear it coming. And then, of course, the word came through. We sent the word down to Singapore. Do they know what the aircraft is? And the sole reply we received from the air headquarters was, do you wish that we should send you some improved binoculars? But it was a diner, what subsequently became known as a diner. So we knew the Japanese were very interested, and things went along nicely until early December. The Japanese moved into what was then called Indochina, which is now South Vietnam. They established, in round figures, 450 aircraft on various airfields around Saigon. They sent in a couple of cruisers, I think, naval squadron. And we were early December, we were sent, I think it was the 3rd of December, after welcoming the Prince of Wales and the Repulse into the naval base. We were sent at Singapore, the naval base at Singapore. We were sent off to Quanton, and everybody then realised that it's only a matter of days. And a couple of those fellows from one squadron at that stage was at Kota Bharu. We were at Quanton. That night, we realised it was on for young and old. The Japanese came in and landed at Kota Bharu on the 8th of December. And it's important to distinguish this because the Americans talk about it, Pearl Harbor, as the 7th of December. And the international date line runs between. So we're both talking about the same day. About midnight, shelling began. A couple of cruisers began shelling Kota Bharu, and Curly Davis, who was the CEO of here's mother back, who was the CEO of one squadron, sent out aircraft to bomb them. But there was quite an incident in the air operations room at Sime Road in Singapore. The Commander-in-Chief, as I showed you the photograph, was old. Well, he wasn't old as I am now, but Sir Robert Brooke Popham, and the air commander was Air Vice Marshal Beaufort. So Beaufort immediately ordered, Davis had to ring Singapore to get permission to attack these Japanese ships. So Beaufort said, yep, go ahead. And then Brooke Popham would set up his headquarters at the naval base, which was a few kilometres away. And it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, they sent a car across for him. And he was quite annoyed about being brought out of bed. So he came across the ops room and he said, what are you doing, Beaufort? What's happened? And Beaufort tried to explain, yeah, but never mind, Beaufort, has there been a declaration of war? No, there's been no declaration of war, sir. But what are you doing if there's not been a declaration of war? Well, yeah, but Beaufort had, and then eventually this is the way he went on, and he eventually turned on his heels and said, well, I hope you know what you're doing, Beaufort, because there could be serious repercussions about this. Well, that's how the war started. We were at Quanton, and another stupid incident, really, from our headquarters. When we went out, we helped bomb the ships off Kota Bharu on the morning of the 8th, and then came back and we had lunch and we thought, well, there'll be another operation this afternoon. Nothing came through. So our acting CO, Pete Henderson, squad leader, sent a signal to headquarters saying, since all the reconnaissance, they had what they called a reconnaissance plan. Since we've carried out all the exercises and sorties of the reconnaissance plan, and war's now started, should we not be removed to an airfield where there is a protection against bombing? Because at Quanton, there was not an aircraft gun, there was not a single fighter aircraft. The signal came back, Tell Henderson to stay where he is. The bombing of Quanton is not in the scheme of things. And as we were deciphering the signal, 9 Nils came across, dropped the bombs, smashed the generating plant, the hangar, and the 3 Hudsons, and so on and so on. And in the meantime, one squadron had a very hard time at Kota. So about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was in the ops room with a fellow called Cyril Williams, the flight lieutenant. We heard aircraft approaching, and we thought, oh, not more Japs. And we looked, watched them go, oh, they're Hudsons. Must be from Kota, and they'd evacuated. So they stayed overnight on the 8th. Next morning, they took off early because they had got okay from at Kota to go to Singapore. They went off early, so we waited to see what the decision would be for us. And late in the afternoon, very late in the afternoon, the Japanese bombers also came down and strafed. They were so low and so confident. The gunners, I remember cowering in a trench in the camp area, bullets whizzing around. So that there was nothing, absolutely not even a heavy machine gun to fire at them. And away we went. About the afternoon, we got the okay to go to Singapore. So I'd been on patrol that morning, and I was having a snooze with a couple of other blokes up in the camp, and I heard these Hudsons taking off, and I thought, gee, what's happening? Must be operation. I've missed out on this. I didn't know whether that's good or bad. But it turned out I rushed down the operations room, and the code books were strewn over the floor, and acid burning out the books and so on. I thought, oh, gee, what'll I do? So I immediately secreted a utility, pickup truck as the Americans call it, in the jungle. I thought at least I'd have a means of escape, but I'll look around for an aircraft first. So I found an aircraft, did a bit of titivating to it because having been a farm boy, I'd worked on tractors and things of that sort, so needed a bit of oil, so I tipped the oil in and found some oil. And another fellow was with me called Dave Day, and we also went back to the camp and retrieved our trunks, cabin trunks with all the goodies in them, and Dave came down and he put it in the aircraft. And then he thought, well, he could be a hero too. So there was a couple of wildebeests there. Most of them had been knocked off, but he said, I think I'll fly a wildebeest down. And I said, well, good luck to you. First of all, he intended to come with me. So he said, will you come down and check it out? So yeah, checked it out. Had a bullet hole in the reduction gear, so we stoppled that up with a bit of a plug we made for some rubber trees, tipped a bit of oil in it, it had to be hand cranked, so I hand cranked it. Off went Day, and I went back to the Hudson and checked it over carefully again. Took off in the Hudson, left the wheels down because the hydraulic system seemed to be out of order. And here I am flying along slowly in the Hudson, past the wildebeest, of course, landed at Singapore. And spent the night at Singapore. Next morning, I was sent out on patrol again, and we went out over the South China Sea. And the idea was we went out over the South China Sea, almost sort of not quite west, but a bit northwest from Singapore, up out to sea, and then dash in towards the coast and come in what they call visibility distance from the coast. See what the Japs were doing, because the brass expected the invasion of Singapore down through the south of the peninsula. And as we came abeam of Quanton, or we were coming abeam, geez, some big ships out there, they must be Japs. And we treated it very cautiously. No, that's the Repulse, because I'd seen them thinking, as I said. And so I said to Jim Ryan, who was my navigator, send them the word of the day. Got the word of the day from the radio bloke. No answer. And we thought, oh, well, I did just... But while we were there, we saw the twinkling of the guns on a battleship and a battle cruiser, both of them. I thought, gee, they're shooting at us. And I called up Bill Malcolm, who was in the turret, and I said, hey, what can you see? He said, oh, there are 9 Japanese aircraft approaching. And I said, well, watch them. And we turned toward, we'd see them, and they dropped bombs, and they hit the Repulse, and off they went. Nothing happened for quite some time. I thought, oh, well, maybe there's to be no more. But then, just as we're watching the fuel gauges and throttle right back to conserve fuel, what happened? Some low-level boys came in. The Japanese started dropping. First of all, we thought they did low-level bombing, but they dropped torpedoes, and they got 2 hits on the Prince of Wales, jammed the rudder, and it started to go around in circles. Up went the black ball, which means not under control. But Repulse kept going. Captain Tennant, torpedoes have been aimed at him, but he did what they call combing the torpedoes. You know, the torpedoes are coming this way, so he goes that way. But the second Jap squadron woke up to this, so they split into about 2 or 3 aircraft here and there and came in this way, that way, and that way. The poor old Repulse tipped over and went down, red bottom up, and away she went. But the old Prince of Wales went around in circles for a while until eventually a destroyer came along and took as many as they could, I suppose. And the Prince of Wales went down. So that was the story on so-called Force Dead. The Hudson, as you see there, and I put there on my book with the Hudson and the Buffalo, is a delightful aircraft to fly, I must say. But having said that, it was all metal. It was the first all-metal aircraft the RAAF ever had acquired. The control surfaces were all metal, whereas the Whirlaway had bits of fabric here and there and so on. A delightful aircraft to fly, beautiful instrument panel, pilot's delight. Only recently have there been better panels equipped in aircraft. They now call these all-glass cockpits, but beautiful. Automatic pilot. It had been converted from the Lockheed 14 airliner, of course, and it had a few tricky things, and it was pretty unforgiving of anybody who transgressed. And one of the features was that the highly tapered wing. You can see how highly tapered the wing is there. On the American NACA, which is the National Advisory Committee, had been experimenting, writing up data on airfoils, and they got what they called the 23012, 12% thick, 23015, and they tapered the wing. The fellow who had quite a bit to say on it was Kelly Johnson, a fellow who became quite famous in Lockheed. He designed the Blackbird and a few other things, the U-2 and so on. And they decided they'd use the 12% at the tip, and they found it had a vicious stall, it stalled and it flicked right over on its back. So what would they do? So they put, you probably can't see it on there, we called them letterbox slots, but they were supposed to be anti-stall tip slots, but they were only effective when the power and the flaps were virtually off, would flap down and about quarter power, stall it, and the tips would stall first, and then she'd go. Needed about 1,500 feet or more to recover, depending how far it went over. And this is what happened out here at the Fairbairn boys. Fairbairn was flying it, and I'm sure he was. I've heard from people who saw them take off. They were coming in on the approach, and this was, as I said before, they fitted the limits to the flaps. They were right down like the one I've shown there, and it was initially, there was a little crank down here where you elevate a trim tab to hold the nose up. Now, I think what happened, Fairbairn was a bit, they wanted to go around again, so he raised the flaps. It was too slow in winding this off, so she went up, stalled, clunk. What they call, people have since called, or no, they still call, elevator trim tab stall. Now, it's not the elevator trim tab that stalls, it's the setting of the trim tab nose up causes the aircraft to stall. But apart from that, yeah, delightful aircraft to fly with automatic pilot and ample room in the cabin. Yeah, well, we were sent out on recce, and we were doing been out and around, we're doing coming back down the coast, when my gunner called up and said, hey, there are 2 fighters out there, just over the coast, so on. So I knew what they were, of course, they'd be the bloody Zeros. So I put on full power. Spuddy was formating on me, I was leading. Buddy was, so I put on full power and like a homesick angel, and unfortunately it was cloud about, so I got into the cloud. But they got onto Spuddy before he could get into cloud. I don't know whether he tried, he says he did, but anyhow, they got him and they shot him down. We saw him, just before we went into cloud, we saw him skip along the water. So I cruised around in the cloud for 20 minutes or so, and then came back because the brass had said the Japanese could be staging through an island called Tioman nearby. Have a look around there to make sure. So I thought, oh, you're a big, young, very, very loyal fellow, better have a look. And I was flying through a misty rainstorm at about 1,000 feet. Could hardly see a mile, a half mile ahead. And what was coming directly at me? 2 zeros. Now, what had happened was they shot Spurgeon down, and they thought, well, the other fellow's hiring up to the Singapore, so we'll go down the coast and we'll get him too. And they realised they'd missed me, and they were on the way back. So they set upon me, and the Hudson subsequently turned out didn't have a downward firing gun at the back, so the only defence was to get as low as hell. So I got so irreducibly low, old Jake's in the cabin said, hey, Skipper, you're making two foamy lanes along the seabed, along the sea surface, so that's about as low as I could get. But they were Navy pilots in the Zeros, and boy, could they shoot. They got one engine out, she caught fire on the engine. Wasn't a severe fire, but smoke and so on. We went a bit further, shortly, they got the other engine, so I had to put it down on the water. Skipped along and put it down on the water. And they got Spuddy because his aircraft sank. And he only had what they called a Mae West in those days, a flotation jacket. And he spent a couple of days in the water, drifting southward. And he went onto the mainland, and the Japanese patrol caught him. But I went onto an island called Sri Bruat, and spent the night there. Next morning we contacted a couple, I don't know whether Malays or Chinese charcoal burners, and said, hey, you got a boat? Yeah, they had a boat. Take me to Mersing or near Mersing. So, yep, we're going to Mersing, we'll take you across. Righto, off we went. And the Japanese aircraft came over looking around, and there was a bit of, I don't know what it was, canvas or something, so all the white people got down beneath the canvas. And they had a close look, but they obviously decided, they're just Malays or whatever. And as we got towards Mersing, these two, I think there were 2 or 3 of them, and I said to my second pilot, Hewitt, I said, the bloody Japanese could be in Mersing. I said, we have to go south of Mersing. And we said to these charcoal burners, go south Mersing. No, I'm going to go to Mersing. South of Mersing. No. So I said to Hewitt, get out your revolver, Ken, and show who's boss around here. So we went down, beach south of Mersing, about a mile south, and the RAAF had a camp there guarding Mersing, but they'd gone. So we went ashore, and the charcoal burners turned around, and they were sailing close to the beach. Next thing, machine guns opened up on them, and the boat began to drift, so we realised somebody around here is dangerous, they don't like us. So we went through the tents. The RAAF had evacuated very, 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 very urgently, quickly, because they'd left tins of jam and bits of bread and things like that. We covered a few feet, mosquito nets rolled, a few things like that into the mosquito net, and we began to track very quickly down south. Now, subsequently, about a month later, when we were at Palembang, Hewitt was talking to an army sergeant, an RAAF sergeant, and he got the story about these fellows who'd come ashore, and that they were the RAAF fellows. About 4 or 5 of them were the sergeants that had been left behind as sort of a rig. I don't know why they were left behind, but they shot our poor. This makes my heart bleed even today. They shot the poor fellows who had helped us escape the Japanese. Anyhow, we got back to Singapore after 5 days, walking, and found a prau, and we sailed that for a couple of days. But we got back. Well, when we arrived back at Singapore, Singapore had been bombed, or had the hell bombed out of it, and so had Sabawang. And the squadrons, the Hudson squadrons and the Blenheims had gone to Palembang. So we thought, oh, here we are at Singapore. The Japs will be here next. What happens? So I did a quick scull around a few Hudsons been left behind. And I found one that, I think, a bomb had landed alongside it, because Sembawang had been very heavily bombed by the Japanese in the previous days. And a huge clod of earth had gone up and landed on the top of the fuselage and staved in on the top of the fuselage. I thought, oh, well, that's better than being killed by the Japanese, I suppose. So I said to my crew, right, get in this thing, we're going to Palembang. And we flew it to Palembang, P2 as it was called. So that's what happened when we arrived. So we operated out of Palembang for about a fortnight. Well, once again, we were seaward reconnaissance and night bombing. Night bombing, I mean, what was the use of the airfields that the Japanese had occupied? We night bombed, even as fast as Alistar, night bombed there and so on. And that went on for a couple of weeks. And Singapore fell on the 15th of February, I think it was, or thereabouts. But in the meantime, the Japanese had also invaded Palembang. And I forget the actual date on which we knew they were coming. There hangs a tale too. This Air Vice Marshal Pulford, there's another fellow called Air Vice Marshal Maltby who was sent out. He was senior to Pulford. And the Hudsons had been doing the reconnaissance out of Palembang to check for the Japanese, but Maltby decided, no, we won't have reconnaissance done by these fellows at Palembang, we'll do it all from Java, because the Blenheims and some of the Hudsons had gone to Java. So, but Curly Davis of one squadron said, oh, well, you know, we'll have a look anyhow, we'll send somebody out every day. So we knew, no thanks to Maltby. That's how crass these fellows were, you got no idea. Pulford lost his life because he couldn't escape. He got in a boat with a Navy Admiral, and they ran out of fuel or something and landed on a small island, and the Japanese destroyer saw their boat there, came in and dismantled the engine, didn't worry about who dismantled the engine. They died of starvation. Pulford and Admiral Spooner, I think, I forget the Admiral's name, a couple of other blokes. But anyhow, the Japanese came in, 4 or 5 transports, and this time they had a bit of fighter protection. We bombed the Japanese transports. 2 fellows were lost, John Lockwood in a Hudson, and who was the other fellow? Anyhow, 2 of our Hudsons and 3 RAAF Hudsons. They might have actually sunk 1 ship, I don't know, but anyhow, the Japanese got ashore, and they got their landing craft ashore, and the worst casualties they suffered were when their landing craft were coming up the Musi River, on which Palembang is situated. By this time, the Hurricanes were there, and with their 8 guns, and they strafed these landing barges. They must have killed hundreds, I don't know how many Japanese. But anyhow, the Japanese got ashore, and so we got the word. Must have been about the end of getting towards the end of February, to move to Java. So we once again, I always seem to be getting landed with these clapped out aircraft, but this time I was ordered. Pete Henderson came to me. Because I'd been shot down, looking a bit haggard, I suppose, and he said, "Get off to Java. Take that aircraft that's the ailerons are damaged, and the one you brought across from Singapore. Get about as many as you think it's safe to get in the thing to fly troops, and take them down to Java." So off I went about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:30 in the afternoon, maybe later. Because in the tropics, as you know, the sun sets later. So I went down to Java, and I was sent to an airfield, to be stationed called Semplak, near what was then called Buitenzorg. It's now in the Indonesians renamed it Bogor. It's I don't know, it'll be a couple of kilometres sort of southeast from, very roughly from Batavia. And as I was approaching this single strip, the Dutch NEI Air Force had hard standing positions. They had these Glen Martins on the Buffalo. They had Buffalo fighters, lined up along just off the edge of the strip, and I thought to myself, brother, when the Japanese, they'll know about this for sure. And not only will they get those, but they get the Hudsons too. And would you believe, about 9 o'clock next morning, the Japanese bombers, fighters came in. They hammered it. So the Hudsons were virtually left. I think there might have been RAAF Hudsons and RAF Hudsons. There might have been 7 or 8 left. So the decision came, 8 Squadron to disband and return to Australia, 1 Squadron to take over all Hudsons and remain to fight the invasion of Java. Well, I got the one with the Hudsons for having been stupid enough to having been shot down and then reach Palembang and go back on reconnaissance next day. That's what the citation university says, etc., with all the embellished words they put in citations. So I got the DFC there. And I did my second operational tour after I'd had periods of instructing on the dreadful Beaufort down at 1OT, 1 Operational Training Unit, first of all at Bairnsdale and then at East Sale. I went back did my second operational tour on Beauforts, and I got my second DFC for that. But when I arrived on this Beaufort, I thought, how could there be such a dog of an aircraft? And I must have had about 12 months there instructing on these wretched things. And then I was sent up and did an operational tour on them. And they had these air screws, and that would happen you get a runaway air screw on takeoff. And it wouldn't govern, the engine would just over rev. So the idea was you shut down that engine and you did a single engine. And it was the first aircraft the RAAF had. I obviously got this idea from the POMs, to use flap on takeoff. And the story was that if the engine cut just about at liftoff with the flap down, you've got no course but to close the other engine and skid along the ground. Now, I didn't like this because the Bairnsdale airfield in those days was surrounded on one sector, and would you believe, the wind normally began blowing, of dead, gnarled, high, big eucalypts. And I thought, cut an engine and skid into these or crash into these. So I took them on myself. I thought, gee, that's good enough for young plenty. So I took a Beaufort up one day with a couple of blokes, navigator and so on. I thought, I'll just try this out. Because the story was, with the flaps down, if the engine cut and you tried to fly it on one engine, it would just roll. So I took it up to about 5,000 or 6,000 feet, and I put the 15 degrees of flap, I think it was, got it back to about what would be lift-off speed, 60, 70 knots. Cut the engine, and I expected it to roll over on its back, because the technique was, of course, when it lost power, boot the rudder against the other engine and use a bit of aileron. Boot the rudder, and geez, we're flying along quite well, aren't we? We're doing. No, this is no joke. Oh, this is what you do, eh? So I came back and I told the fellows, I said, look, there's no way, there's no need if you lose an engine on takeoff with the flap down. I said, there's no need to cut the other engine. I said, if you can control it, it will climb. See, I established because with the Pratt & Whitney engine, I must have had another extra 300 horsepower combined on the Taurus, which was a British engine, and it would climb. And I said, you just go ahead and climb. Oh, well, show us this, will you? So I went out on the airfield and I said, righto, I'll show you what to do, how it goes. And the problem number 1 solved. number 100 Squadron. We were bombing Repulse at first. The Japs weren't very, when they knew I'd returned, they weren't very kind to me. They Ack and night fighters, they had a few night fighters, but the Ack Repulse, they really fortified Repulse, really did fortify. You've heard the stories of people bombing Germany saying the flak was so thick they could get out and walk on it. Well, the Japs tried the same thing. Searchlights, Ack, got a couple of close hits, but not hits, but explosions, a little bit of shrapnel through one wing at one stage. But I think we bombed from about 14 or 15,000 feet, so we're probably just about at the top of their trajectory of their Ack shells. Also, that fellow I showed you, Joe Hewitt, who was the AOC of what they called 9 Ops Group, decided that the Japs had cruisers and merchant troop ships in Repulse Harbour that Beaufort is a torpedo bomber, and there was a torpedo training school at Nowra, run by a fellow called Shorty Dibbs. I'll say no more about him. So the crews had been trained. I did the torpedo course, but I was thankful. 8 Squadron was rearmed with Beauforts, and they were given the job of the torpedo boys. 100 Squadron didn't have to, because before I arrived on my second tour, on my tour of Beaufort, 100 Squadron had been a torpedo squadron, so they said, well, it's only fair that they changed over to 8 Squadron. So I think we lost 3 in Repulse Harbour. Noel Quinn, who became a prisoner of war. Another fellow called Owen Price. He was hacked down by a cruiser, I think. I don't know whether it was 2 or 3, but anyhow, that was just impossible because the Simpson Harbour was virtually an enclosed harbour with an entrance. The Japs had searchlights around the periphery. They had Beaufort 20mm guns and so forth. Send the torpedoes in at night of course, it was just futile. The Beaufort was not an easy aircraft to fly. Much more difficult than the Hudson, and I suppose the Hudson. But these fellows went through flying training schools. I think they had flying training school on Wirraways, on Oxfords, and on Ansons. Now the Wirraway blokes weren't too bad because the Wirraway had what they call constant speed air screws, adjustable governed air screws, and a Pratt & Whitney engine using what they call the boost gauge and so on. The Oxford was just 9-cylinder cheater engines with a wooden prop. Easy, your baby could fly it. And the Anson was even less forgiving. And these poor buggers arrived there, and they get hit with this Beaufort. And first of all, they'd go out doing an aviation exercise over Bass Strait and wouldn't return at night. What happened, I suppose? The engine was flying, maybe, I don't know. And then the general flying, trying to fly them in formation. I remember one day, 3 aircraft, 3 trainees, and the 3 Beauforts went over flying formation, a couple collided, and in they went. Landing at night, terrible, whereas the Hudson had very, very, very effective landing lights. The Beaufort had a silly sort of a thing on one wing. So they fell out of the air like hailstones, in other words, and the funeral, this started at Bairnsdale, of course, and the undertakers at Bairnsdale did a roaring trade, and they were very disappointed, I'm sure, when the Beauforts moved to East Sale, but the East Sale undertakers rubbed their hands in glee. No, we had a funeral a week, and one of the saddest things was, of course, the parents would turn up and so forth, and a senior officer, I was what they called a senior officer by this stage, the OC of East Sale would say, righto, Plenty, you go off to the funeral and you sympathise. No, this is true. You sympathise with the relatives. So we had to go around sort of saying, that was worse. The Beaufort was bad enough to fly, but that was worse than flying the Beaufort. You know, it was a sorrowful occasion, terrible. They want to know why the aircraft crashed. Now, you can't turn around and say, because the bloody pilot was incompetent or just couldn't handle it or anything like that. Just had to try and be terribly sympathetic and so on. It was the worst experience, I reckon probably the worst experience of my wartime experience. I don't know, but it was. I mean, it was a terrible thing to go through the church service with the firing party outside, be sitting there, the parson would be drumming away, his dull cadence, you know, and then he'd finish and obviously somebody at the door would give a signal and these 21 303s would fire. And then the poor bereaved would almost jump out of their seats with it. You know, it's a bit of a barbaric. It started during World War II or before, I suppose, this firing party business. I think it's a bit overdone. The poor, and then we'd have to go off into the funeral procession to the bloody cemetery and so forth. Yeah, I came back. And the customary after an operational tour was to get a month's leave or whatever it was. And I was married by then, and I had a son, a young son. I didn't remember, about 5 or 6 months old. And I thought, having done 2 operational tours, married with a son, surely there must be some sort of a cushy job for a very clever, experienced squadron leader. And while I'm on leave the last couple of days, bloody telegram arrived saying, report to 1 OTU, East Sale for instructional duties on Beaufort as commanding officer of No. 1 Beaufort Training Squadron. So I was there until the end of the war.